back, everyone. It is a new season for impact and innovation, and it's kind of a symbolic season. So this season's episodes, we're going to have around 5 episodes dropping in the next month or so, and these are all people who are coming to speak to my class on public health entrepreneurship here at the Yale School of Management. Our first guest is Ashlee Wisdom, founder of Health in Her Hue. Thank you so much for being here, Ashlee.
Thank you for having me.
And just to provide a little bit of background before we dive in, my students are partly MBA students at SOM, partly MPH students from the Yale School of Public Health. And the point I wanted to make about this specific moment in time that we're going to be addressing in the next several episodes is that it is a time to be entrepreneurial in public health and to talk about what public health means, what public health entrepreneurship means, and why we're having these conversations now. And so I know that you have a master's in public health and you were doing
Yes.
some more traditional public health work before you started Health in Her Hue. I also want to remind our listeners this is the second time you're on the podcast. The first was 2 years ago when you were first raising venture capital funding,
Yes.
and now you have been funded ever since then.
Yes.
So first of all, congratulations on making it this
Thank
far.
you.
Opening thoughts, just like what feels different today than 2 years ago when you were struggling to raise and we first met?
Yes. And that was in 2023. I was raising technically my first real institutional round. So I raised a pre-seed round of 1.2 million. This time I was raising a price seed round and we raised 3 million. And this is in 2023. And for those who know how the venture capital markets, 2022 to 2023 was a really difficult time for venture funding. There weren't as many IPOs happening or companies going public. And that going public is what results in liquidation and investors having more money to then reinvest in other companies. So I say all that to say it was a really difficult time to be fundraising. And then you add on the layers of like raising capital as a woman, raising capital as a Black woman. But I still got it done. And so I think that that's a huge testament to like investors really seeing the value of the company that I'm building and the problem that we're solving.
So quick refresher for those who didn't tune in the first time, tell us about Health in Her Hue and what it does.
Yes, so Health in Her Hue is a digital women's health platform that is focused on connecting Black women and other women of color to culturally sensitive healthcare providers through our provider directory. And then we also create educational health content that's tailored to the needs of women of color. And then the third C is community support. So we have a community forum where women can connect with other women of color patients who may be navigating similar healthcare experiences or diagnosis. And then our Care Squad programs are these physician-designed peer support groups, again, focused around specific conditions that disproportionately impact Black women and women of color. So we're really serving the purpose of helping connect women to affirming healthcare providers and then connecting them to healthcare resources and community to support them on their healthcare journeys.
And you mentioned last time that the financial model here is not that the women themselves pay, but rather that their insurance companies, the payers and health plans pay, right?
Yes, exactly. So we're not charging on the direct-to-consumer side. We are really focusing on a B2B2C model where we partner with health plans. And as we get further in the conversation, I'm sure we'll probably talk more about the other customers that we're starting to engage with. But our primary go-to-market is focusing on partnering with health plans where they pay for access to our platform for their members and then pay for their members to access our Care Squad program.
One thing I noticed that changed today in class when you're talking to my students is just the way you articulated really the the financial case for Health in Her Hue, which was so aligned with the mission and the social impact in terms of you had commented in the past about how there's a lack of trust between Black women and the healthcare system and how there are historical reasons behind that lack of trust. But today you just tied it to the business case so tightly, and I'm going to try to say it back to you. You were basically saying, actually, I wrote it here, so I'm going to use my notes. You were basically saying that Black patients are avoiding care because they don't trust the healthcare system. And so by the time they go to the doctor, it's more expensive, the prognosis is worse, the outcomes are going to be worse. And so women of color don't trust healthcare, and that lack of trust is costing you, the payers and the health plans, money.
Yeah.
It's better if they seek healthcare sooner, earlier, more frequently, and more preventatively, right? And you've proven that that's true.
Yes, and really getting crisp on the value proposition to who we ultimately want to be the buyer of our product. There's like the end user,
Mm-hmm.
which are the women of color,
Mm-hmm.
and the value proposition is very
It's
clear and
obvious.
obvious to
Yeah.
them. But being able to communicate that to the person or the institution that we ultimately want to pay for our services has been an evolution for me as a founder and CEO, but something that we've clearly gotten gotten down pat because we were able to close our first health plan pilot that has now turned into our first commercial health plan contract.
I thought it was really interesting that some students mentioned in class that they thought you should be a nonprofit. And I think they're used to seeing the social mission of
Mhm.
serving people of color and women of color dealt with in the more traditional public health spaces and nonprofit spaces. And they're not used to someone saying, there's a business case for this, and someone's going to capitalize on that business case. And it actually makes a difference who that person is. Is it someone who's going to capitalize on it in an exploitative way?
Right.
Or is it someone who's going to capitalize it in a way that's win-win? And I think what you've done is succeeded in capitalizing on it in a way that's win-win, where your patients are winning, the payers are winning, and you, hopefully, are winning.
And on that point around nonprofits, and this was a statement one of my bosses, when I worked at a federally qualified health center, he said that some people might perceive this as controversial, that a nonprofit status is really just a tax,
It
code.
is.
And
Come
he's
on,
like,
Yale and Harvard make so much money, and so do their hospitals, but they're nonprofits.
And he's like, at the end of the day, a nonprofit organization still has to find a sustainable way to do the work that it's doing. And I didn't want, granted, I'm also trying to not rely on venture capital in perpetuity. I want to build a profitable, scalable business and use venture capital to help expedite our growth. But if we went the nonprofit route, we also would be completely reliant on philanthropic dollars, which can be snatched away at any moment. And you have to find a way to do the work sustainably, which is literally what a for-profit business is forcing you to have to do, is figure out how you're going to do this work in a sustainable and scalable way. And so that's another reason why I went the for-profit route. But in addition to what you just said, is that a pain point is a business opportunity. So, and Black and brown patients or people, they have pain points and points of friction in their lived experiences, and it doesn't have to be seen as charity to solve those pain points for them. It can be a business opportunity and a profitable one at that.
And right now is a moment when a lot of people are rethinking about how to provide public health. And when I say public health, I don't just mean healthcare services in the very profit-oriented way that this country has become, but actually tackling racial health disparities.
Mm-hmm.
And that's public health language, right? But in the past, it's always been talked about in this nonprofit way, in this very academic health economics way. But the way you're talking about it is very entrepreneurial in the sense that you're saying, here's what needs to be done. Here's why I should be the person doing it. And here's why you should be paying me in terms of talking to the payers. And that is not in conflict with the mission, with the public health mission. It's actually driving it. I think it is very rare for capitalistic models to achieve those public health outcomes. And I think this is just one of those examples. But I'm sure there are potential trade-offs and potential pitfalls that you could fall in.
Yeah, for sure.
What are some of the ones that you're more cognizant of than others, or thinking about more than others?
One that comes up frequently is like, do you need to say that the company is being built for Black women? Explicitly? Can you just say woman of color? Black women may be more limiting. And my reaction to that is like, especially now with people shying away from using certain words, including health equity, because they don't want their initiatives to be attacked.
I didn't know that health equity is uncool now.
Yeah, health equity is no longer a cool term or thing to be doing. And so some people are thinking through,
what are we supposed to be saying?
I don't know. We're going to have to find new language.
Okay.
But I can see both sides. I'm very much, I wouldn't be an entrepreneur, I guess, if I didn't have this character trait. But like, I'm not someone who shies away from using terminology, or because I think that language is important and intentionality is important.
Yeah, I think so too.
But some people are like, well, you'll be probably more receptive, or people will be more receptive if you just kind of keep it broad. Like if you say Black women, it may kind of like make people think that it's not as big of an opportunity. And the reason for me not wavering on that is when I saw the statistics specifically for Black women, that is what burdened me and bothered me so much. and led me to start this company. And so it felt important at every step of this company to honor that that is what brought me to this work. And so shying away from that just felt disingenuous, like trying to water down that problem that Black women are facing. That didn't sit well with me. So I was like, that's not something I'm willing to concede on. And I may have not get money from certain people, and that's fine because I want investors that aren't going to tell me I can't say that this is who I'm building it for and why I'm building it in this way. But it's things like that where people are like, you don't want to do anything that will stop anyone from giving you money. But I've been very intentional about only wanting people that are aligned with what I'm building and how I feel it needs to be built. Because if you then let everyone in, then that is where you find yourself in more of a position where you're having to make even more concessions to appease and accommodate people. And so I'm glad that I didn't water down that language in my approach to building, because I have the right partners to support me along this journey. And that I think has been really important for our success.
I think that is absolutely important for your success. And I think it's a cross cutting piece of advice that would benefit any entrepreneur, no matter what you're working on. You need to find investors, especially if you're working in the venture capital space, who are aligned with your values.
Yeah.
Because once you take investment, there are going to be other decision makers and other people putting pressure on you. And you want to make sure you're all playing the same game and you all have the same end game. Otherwise, there's always going to be trade-offs and you're going to be being pretty much forced to make decisions you don't want to make or getting fired and replaced.
Right, or getting replaced by, yeah.
I think that is absolutely important, and something I always tell my students is that you must be picky. You must conduct due diligence on your investors,
Yeah.
not just them. Conduct due diligence on you in terms of how they're going to support you, not just give you money. So I'm really glad that lesson came up because I think it's super important. And I also don't want to assume that all of our listeners have the same familiarity as you with some of those statistics and problems about Black women's health in the U.S. So can you share a little bit more about that?
Sure. I think the one statistic that people may be more familiar with is the fact that Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from maternal mortality and morbidity compared to our white peers. We're more likely to die from cervical cancer, which is an avoidable, preventable cancer. The other stat that I include in my pitch deck, it comes from a survey that was done by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And it's highlights that 1 in 5 Black patients report avoiding care because of the fear of experiencing bias and discrimination at the hands of a provider of the healthcare system. And that statistic really it breaks my heart every time to know that there are people who don't want to go and see the doctor because they've either had a negative experience or had a family that's had a negative experience, and they just much rather not subject themselves to any more racism or bias, because they may be experiencing it at work or in other aspects of their life. And you're already vulnerable when you're going to seek healthcare. And so it's just unnerving to know that people are avoiding engaging with preventative care at that, because they are assuming that they're going to, and a rightful assumption at that they may experience bias at the hand of the healthcare system.
And that is specifically where I think you chose to intervene.
Yes.
And you shared with us that your products are kind of threefold in the sense that, and I'm going to go into like what value you're creating and getting out of each product. So first you have the directory of providers that have been vetted by Health and Hue to provide culturally relevant care. So they either are Black women themselves or know what are in sync with the specific challenges that Black women face. Like your personal story that you were facing when you started this about having stress hives and your provider not even asking you like, what's going on at work? So the directory is one where patients can find a provider of their choice, content in terms of education for patients, and then community in terms of patients being able to interact with each other. And it sounds like one of the things that has really come up in the past couple of years where I saw the difference today in class from 2 years ago was the value of that community in terms of how you've organized these care squads where it's like peer groups that meet with each other. And I realized that you kind of had this vision from the beginning that you're not going to charge people for the directory, but you had this theory or this hypothesis that like once you build community, once you get all these Black women in one place, that's going to have value and you're just going to prove it at some point.
Yep.
And now it has proven itself, right?
Absolutely. And we're like at the beginning of proving out that value, and the fact that we have consumer health and digital health companies reaching out to us, wanting to partner and saying like, hey, we are trying to get more patients to engage with our product, our service, but paying for ads on Meta and not knowing if it's getting in front of a health conscious audience or the patients that we're trying to engage. That's costing a lot of money for us to put our marketing dollars there. But we know that Health Under Hue has this health conscious, highly engaged community. How can we partner with Health Under Hue to get our product and service vetted by Health Under Hue and then in front of their audience? And I'm so glad that I stuck with that conviction to build community, to build trust first, that will then enable the development of a community, and then glean insights from the community around what they need, what they want, and build products in alignment with that. I think too often, and that's my public health and also just, primarily my public health background. And then also I think my lived experience as a Black woman, knowing that community is very core to how we navigate from a cultural standpoint. Some investors and other people were like, what's this community thing? And now you cannot find a company that isn't building community in some way as part of their marketing strategy. And so I'm glad that I was ahead of the curve. I'm also glad that I listened to my instinct and was very intentional about trying to understand what Black women wanted. Because I was just like, I'm one Black woman with a very specific lived experience. I don't know what Black women want and need writ large. And so it felt important to build a community, provide value, build trust, build a community, and then from there, have the community share with me what they want, and then continue to broker that trust with them by building products that are reflective of what they've shared with me. And so the provider directory was exactly that. I knew that that wasn't going to be our scalable business model, and this is not a shade at ZocDoc, but I knew that building a niche provider directory in and of itself wasn't going to be the VC scalable business. But I built that because that's what Black women kept saying, is that I either want to find a provider who looks like me, or a provider who I know may not look like me, but I know is trusted among women of color and is in touch with what's going on with us. And it's hard for me to do that. I'm having to either rely on my social network. I'm seeing all these statistics about Black women being dismissed or being more likely to die. So it's really important for me to find a provider who looks like me or is vetted by a trusted source. And when we built the directory, we built the minimal viable version of it. I took a screen grab of it, posted it on Instagram, and it went viral overnight. We had thousands. I think we had 34,000 people log into that product, and I was so embarrassed because it was not beautiful at all. But people have said if your first product, if you're not embarrassed by it, you waited too long to put it out in the market.
That's a great quote. I've never heard it before, so I will remember that.
And I'm glad that I listened to it because I was like, oh, this is not the product I want people seeing. But clearly there's a demand for it. And I'm glad that I didn't wait until it was perfect and pristine, because you just got to put it out there and let people interact with it, engage with it, give you the great feedback, this is terrible, fix this. But all of that is super valuable to get from the community. And so I'm glad that I stuck with that conviction, didn't waver on it. And now that community is starting to generate interest from large brands. We partnered with Aveeno. We're getting some interest from pharmaceutical companies. And so it wasn't all for naught.
This semester, for the first time, I'm dividing this course, Public Health Entrepreneurship, into 3 modules. The first was Drivers of Health, which we didn't podcast about yet. We'll do that later. The second started today, or the first case, and it's Capitalism in Health. And then the third we'll talk about more later, which is exit and building ecosystem. But there's a reason I chose to focus a module in the course on capitalism and health. And that reason is that it's debatable whether capitalism is in line with health equity. Can you tackle racial health disparities while making money for people? You've proven that you can. What you're doing is capitalizing on this community. You built it and then you found value in it. And just even using that word might make some people, public health people, kind of flinch or in fear of wait, is she exploiting these women? How is she capitalizing on them? Like capitalizing is associated with
Yeah, it
something
seems like a
bad and
pejorative.
exploitative. And I think that's the difference between who the entrepreneur is. There might be an entrepreneur that's exploiting, that's doing it in an exploitative way.
Right.
Like I think most social media platforms are, right? And
Mhm.
then there might be an entrepreneur that's capitalizing on community and building power for community. And you're the first person who introduced me to the terminology design justice, where you're applying design thinking to build power for others and thinking about the different identities and intersectionalities of your end user.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's one point I wanted to make, is that capitalizing on something isn't always evil. And capitalism, initially, the concept wasn't inherently evil. It's just that it got out of control in recent decades and years and days and, and weeks. But that it absolutely can be a force for good. And that's something we've talked about a lot on this podcast. And then the second point I wanted to make is that you are building power for these women in your community. And after class, one of my students, who is a Black woman, started talking to you about how can you have like advisory groups of customers who are vetting not only providers, but maybe even products
Mhm.
and or clinical trials or all sorts of things that women might see value in, but don't trust. And like, why shouldn't they be the ones to vet it, or even the providers in your network to vet
Yep.
it? So I feel like there is so much untapped power in this community, and I don't know what you're going to do with it, but it's just like sitting there waiting to be unleashed.
And that's what excites me.
Yeah.
And I think I told you there was an investor that I spoke with 5 years ago when she was working at another fund, and they ultimately passed on investing. And now she has her own fund, and we recently caught up, and she apologized for being one of the doubters in the community, like focus of Health Under Hue. But is also really excited about seeing how we were able to continue to grow and like the value that that community is now bringing. And so yeah, I'm proud of that, and I'm proud of the fact that like Black women also who are part of the community want to see the company continue to grow and
Hmm.
scale, and have been excited about seeing some of the partnerships. I was nervous for a while and thought like, are they, the moment we start monetizing, are they gonna like get the ick, if you will, of like, oh,
Yeah.
Health and Who's capitalizing off of us? But no, they've been excited about seeing our partnerships with Honey Pot Co., which is another Black women-led company that creates feminine products and products for people with uterus
Hmm.
and vaginas, rather, is their marketing language. And then recently a partnership with Black Girl Vitamins. They're excited about seeing Health Under Hue partner with brands that are beloved by the community and brands that are big, like Aveeno. Like Aveeno's not Black owned, but it's a brand that is kind of beloved by Black people. And so they were like, Aveeno partner with Health Under Hue. This is amazing. We love this. And so that makes me happy to see that they're not feeling squeamish about seeing how we are monetizing via these partnerships. They're actually excited about the fact that we're bringing some of their beloved products and are kind of co-signing it as being
Hmm.
good for Black women.
Yeah, and that's your your end users are your biggest fans. They're your biggest evangelists, and that's what makes a company go viral, when your customers are your evangelists. And also, I think a distinctive factor between a public health or social entrepreneur in general and an exploitative entrepreneur is when you think about you're building value, you ask the question, for whom am I building value? So like,
Yes.
yes, you are building value for payers, but in a way that benefits the
The
customers
end.
and builds value for them as well,
Yeah.
the end users. The payers are also the paying customers. But on that note, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the funders that you've been working with for the past few years, because I know you made the point that the insurance companies themselves and the pharmaceutical companies themselves, our limited partners are investing in some of the funds, the
Mhm.
VC funds that invest in entrepreneurs.
Yep.
And so, what's going on there? Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on that front.
Yeah, I think that that's the fact that some of our target enterprise customers are investing in the funds that have invested in us. Are it's validating to know that they see the value in investing in solutions that are serving underserved patient populations. And
That means
also,
the financial case has been made.
exactly, because they, at this point, we're now in 2025. at this point, the just investing in a Black-led fund that's investing in Black founders, that's no longer the thing that people are
People are getting
excited.
sued
People are now getting
to
sued
do
and attacked. It's
that.
almost like kind of risky to do that work. So the fact that these large health enterprises are still investing and deploying capital in funds that are investing in companies like a Health and Hue is a
They're
test.
not doing this
They're
for
not
diversity,
they're
equity, and
not.
inclusion.
And they're not
Yeah.
doing it just out of the kindness of their heart or for altruistic reasons.
Yeah.
They're expecting a return from that fund, and that fund that invested in me is expecting a return on the capital that they put in my company. And so I feel very confident that I'll be able to generate that return for all parties involved. But I think, that it just makes a point salient that a business case has been made for the problem that my company is solving and other companies that are solving a similar problem to Health and Hue were needed.
It also could be one of the risks in terms of thinking about like who controls and exploits. But one thing you mentioned today is that when I asked you, like, oh, the health plan sales cycle is so long, do you see yourself raising more venture capital just for the cash flow until you can sell? And you're like, no, I don't want to dilute because I want to retain ownership. And part of that is financial.
Yeah.
And another part of it is to also, I'm guessing, maintain
Maintain
control of
ownership.
decision makings where it's like, yes, you all get to benefit from this, but I'm going to keep my end users in mind when I'm making decisions, and I'm going to make decisions that benefit them.
Exactly.
I'm only going to benefit you as long as it benefits them.
Yes.
I'm never going to benefit you when there's a trade-off. I think that's really the distinction between you doing this and someone else doing this.
And that's why I'm glad I took up the mantle and didn't just sit on my hands, if you will.
So on that note, I want to close with general lessons in entrepreneurship that you've learned in the past couple of years since we last spoke. So there's so much we can talk about in terms of what you learned raising money, what you learned about how to focus your strategy, what you learned about team. Let's start with those three things. I'm already throwing so much at you.
So much that I can say about all three of those things.
Yeah, please do.
About fundraising, I would say one of the biggest traps for an entrepreneur, I think, is especially when you're just beginning to like even get the attention of an investor, is talking to investors that are just not aligned with the stage of your company. So if you're a pre-seed, seed stage company, I'm not saying don't talk to Series A investors. You want to start to nurture and build those relationships with investors. But when you're actively in fundraise mode, you should only really be talking to the investors that are aligned with the thesis. They have a thesis that's aligned with your company. So if they only invest in D2C consumer products,
direct to consumer, yeah.
why pitch them? So really getting clear about which funds make sense for your business.
Don't put yourself in a situation where you're going to change your business model to please an investor.
Exactly. So that's the one thing I would say from a fundraising standpoint. I think you mentioned, what are the other 2 points?
The team.
The team. A startup company is so dynamic, and it's who you need on day 0 is going to be very different from who you need on day 2, 3, and on. And I would always hear people say, like, people are the hardest part of building a business. And I'm like, I'm great with people. I love people. It's going to be great. And it's like, you may have someone who is brilliant and amazing, but they may not be the person that's going to help you take the company to the next inflection point and stage. And that's both, for me, it was really heartbreaking. But also my job as CEO is to steward the company. And so you have to get clear on like, what is the level of expertise that I need at this point? Because you don't really have the flexibility of having people learn on the job in a startup. You may have some folks who are great, and the learning curve is like quick for them, but you can't just out of the kindness of your heart.
No, you need someone who's done this before.
Exactly.
Whatever this is.
Exactly. So that's what I'll see on team.
Sales, fundraising.
Yes. Need tried and true expertise. And I heard people say you need A players, and I didn't really understand what they mean, but like you need like mini founders on your team. Like I need many people, like no one's ever going to care and love your business the way that you do as the person who started it and, the executive. But I would say the folks who I have on my team now, they stay up late. They're thinking about the company around the clock. And that is kind of the profile you need in an early stage startup. So team, I can get on my soapbox about team. I've learned lots of lessons.
You know, some of the students I talk to have an idea they want to implement, and they think they need to recruit a co-founder because they can't do it alone. And the way you're talking makes me think like, you can't recruit a co-founder, like, if it's your baby, but you can recruit a team that
Yes.
will act like several co-founders that will really hold this baby with you.
Yes, definitely. And I shared with you earlier that I felt for a while that I wouldn't be able to build, or that I couldn't build and raise capital as a solo founder, Black woman founder. But that has not been the case. You don't always need you always need a number two, a number three, and a four, but they don't necessarily have to be a co-founder. So I would encourage any entrepreneur, don't feel like you can't start the business and grow it if you don't have a co-founder. And if you do, great.
Yeah, you've mentioned a few times being a Black woman founder.
Hmm.
Um, and some of our some of our listeners might know what that means and why you keep mentioning, but others might not. So
Sure.
share more about, like, what do we know about, we've been talking about the public health system and the
Hmm.
healthcare system, but entrepreneurship itself is a system. It is an
Yes.
entrenched system with a status quo where
Hmm.
some people have power, some people don't, and not anyone gets to play. And so tell
Hmm.
us more what we know about entrepreneurship itself as a system, and what it means to be a woman in entrepreneurship, what it means to be Black in entrepreneurship. Say more about that.
So I'll speak about it specifically in the context of building
Fundraising.
a VC-backed company. Less than, I want to say, and I sometimes I don't look at the statistics because they're so disheartening, but less than like 1% of venture capital goes to Black women. And so with those statistics, I am kind of insane for
Yeah.
for going about doing what I'm doing. And so that's literally what it is. Some Black women have great ideas, but they feel they can't get business loans, because VC is also not always the right type of capital for every business. But if you are trying to raise a VC-backed business, it's almost impossible to get funding as a Black woman. So to do so, like that's why there are like lists that Business Insider publishes that says like, oh, here are the 100 Black women that raise, or 50 Black women that raise
Mm.
venture capital in 2025, because it's so few of us. Like, we actually have our own like stealth community. That's how like
Oh.
few Black women.
See, okay, you just said stealth community, and based on what you've been able to build value off a community, I'm thinking once you're done with Health and Her Hue, you're gonna go work with that stealth community and
Yes,
they'll sell you some. Yeah,
and help invest in other Black women
yeah.
entrepreneurs. But there's so much pattern matching of like investing in founders that graduated from certain institutions, the Stanfords, the Harvards, the Yales. And so having a certain pedigree will get you access to certain networks that can then
Mm.
get you access to capital. I did not go to an Ivy League institution. I went to great institutions, went to Howard University, NYU. But there's certain pattern matching that happens in
Mm.
venture capital. And so investors like to invest in companies and founders that they feel have the highest possibility
Mm.
of being successful. And part of that process is being able to raise money. And so, actually a fellow Black woman founder, and CEO, she and I were talking. She was like, I wonder sometimes if like investors don't want to invest in us in Black women because they know how hard it is for us to raise capital. And so they're nervous that if they give us money, even if they believe in our business,
Someone else won't.
someone else won't. And so that puts their investment potentially at risk.
They want to place their bets on the winning horse.
Yeah. And so that's another dynamic. And I won't get into my soapbox about this, but the other thing is like, people will invest in a Black founder, a Latina founder, and be like, that's the one we're going to make.
Check.
And so I've experienced other Black women founders who've shared with me, like, I pitched an investor or one of your investors or an investor, and they're like, do you know Ashlee from Health and Her Hue? And they're like, yes, but we're not building the same thing.
Yeah.
And so those are some of the
It's like, oh, I
dynamics.
already invested in Ashlee. Why would I invest in you?
Those are some of the things that are at play that make it so difficult for
They wouldn't ask that to a
entrepreneurs.
white male.
No, not at all. To say like, oh, so-and-so's, but like there's an Uber and a Lyft.
Right.
Like
Exactly.
there can be companies that are building, I mean, in that case, they're literally building the same product in the
Yeah.
same market. But in the examples that I'm sharing with other Black women founders, they are not building the exact same thing as Health and Her Hue. It's like adjacent, and they're getting told like, oh, there's already a company doing that work. And so that's another point of friction that entrepreneurs like myself are also facing.
It's almost like they're saying there is financial value, but there's only so much financial value. Well,
Yeah.
I look forward to watching you prove them wrong.
Thank you.
What about acquisition? How are you thinking about acquisition?
Yeah, so
or in terms of your exit?
I've always been clear-eyed. Once I did all my research in venture capital before I took anyone's check. And so I knew once I was building in this ecosystem that an exit was like, I had to be prepared to
Required.
sell the company.
Right.
And so for me, my ideal exit is to sell to a larger healthcare organization, whether it be a digital health company or let's say a health plan, where we can basically provide like the identity centered care or like focus on the women of color aspect of the entity once they acquire us. And I know that integration, it's all of the devil's in the details, if you will. So things may not necessarily pan out exactly the way that I'm ideally envisioning it. But that's really what I ultimately hope to do, is like find a bigger and larger platform for Health and Hue to exist within.
The more I talk to you, the more I realize you have a long-term game in reaching your public health goals. And Health and Hue, you have a lot of clarity on what goals this company will reach.
Yes.
And then once you reach those goals and it's in safe hands in terms of like continuing without you, I've sensed that you and this is true of most people, will just play different roles at different stages in your life.
Absolutely. I'm like, one of my founder friend, I keep mentioning
Yeah.
her, Erica. She was like, Ashley, it seems like your life's goal and mission is to, like, you care deeply about women of color and obviously particularly Black women because that's the type of body that you live within. And that's your life mission. And Health and Hue is a manifestation of that, but it's not the end all be all. And it's not the only way that you will be bringing that mission to fruition in your lifetime. And I really appreciated her framing it in that way, because sometimes as an entrepreneur, you feel like your identity is so wrapped up in the first thing that you built. And it's like, no, this is a reflection of the problems and the things in society that I care deeply about.
Exactly.
But it's not necessarily going to be the only thing that I do to try to solve this huge and massive problem.
So I hope, well, first of all, we mentioned Erica. So what's her company
It's
called? What's
called MedHall, and
MedHall.
she does they do medical transportation for patients with
Oh,
complex
wow. I love that.
complex needs.
Cool. So Erica from MedHall.
Yeah.
And then, so what I was going to say is, so this is the second time you join us. I hope that you will exit in a timely manner, that the time frame that you want.
Yes.
And that you will come back a third time and we'll hear about what your soapbox looks and sounds like at that time and what challenges you're tackling out there in the world.
I'm excited. I'm looking forward to that day.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Keep up the amazing work. We're so proud of you and so grateful for you. And anything we can do to help you, don't hesitate to let us know. Thank you.